You know what I like? Spawn.
Every time somebody farts, a demon catches her wings. Twins.
When Spawn made his comic book debut in 1992, he was unlike any other superhero I'd ever seen. He had an incredibly cool design, a gritty and dark backstory, and superpowers derived from hell itself. He was a kick-ass, no-nonsense, blood and guts anti-hero, armed to the teeth with guns, chains, that all-encompassing red shroud, and necroplasmic energy that can annihilate bad guys, but also serves as Spawn's life force, his very essence keeping him in this world. And he was also surrounded by a memorable cast of supporting characters, allies, and of course villains, with some standouts being detective duo Sam and Twitch, the heavenly anti-Spawn known as the Redeemer, and of course the Violator, an ancient and powerful demon that walks the earth in the guise of a disgusting, repulsive clown that both monitors and torments Spawn.
I don't mind being short, fat, and ugly, but the pay sucks.
The artwork by Todd McFarlane was absolutely mesmerizing, and the stories being told seemed so much more adult and graphic than any other comic series I'd ever read. And that went double for the animated series that started airing on HBO in 1997. It was filled with coarse language, nudity, adult themes, and plenty of graphic violence. So, as an impressionable 10-year-old boy, I of course loved this show, and watched it every chance I got, while still reading the comics and picking up the occasional action figure, which it must be said that the Spawn series definitely had some of the best. Eventually, we even got a Spawn film adaptation also in 1997, and it's not too bad, I guess. It has a great cast, featuring Martin Sheen as antagonist Jason Wynn, the always awesome Michael Jai White as the man himself, and John Leguizamo in a surprisingly awesome bit of casting, as he did a fantastic job portraying the clown. It's not a great movie, mind you. Some of the CG effects are especially dated, and it's not very well paced. After all, it is kinda hard to fit in all of Spawn's backstory and the events of an entire volume of comic books into only 90 minutes. But if you've got some time to kill and you want to enjoy an entertaining 90s action flick, you can do a lot worse than Spawn. But of course, such a legendary superhero has to have at least some video game adaptations. And Spawn has several, ranging from really fun to, not so much.
Bad crispy, clown not like.
So with that in mind, let's take a look at a big bunch of Spawn games, and find out which ones are worth playing, and which ones should be banished to the pits of hell.
Oh, when do we get a bathroom break?
First up, from 1995, we have Todd McFarlane's Spawn the video game on the SNES, which was published by Acclaim and developed by Ukiyote, who I'd honestly never heard of before, but after doing some research, discovered that prior to this game, they'd also developed Hook and Skyblazer on the SNES, and later worked on a bunch of Neo Geo conversions before they disbanded, and a bunch of their developers migrated over to SNK. Anyway, how did they do with this game? Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but overall Spawn on the SNES is pretty good. It's kind of a blend of a beat-em-up and a side-scrolling platformer, which is a combination that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, and it's handled pretty well here. For starters, Spawn has light and heavy punches and kicks that can also be used when jumping and crouching, which results in things like a chain attack or a flip kick. But something annoying is that even though this is a beat-em-up, you can't really perform any combos, or at least not in the same way you could in a game like Final Fight, for example, as all of your attacks either stun or knock your enemies down, unless they're a boss, in which case you can potentially stun lock them and keep spamming the same attack over and over again. But on the other hand, Spawn does come equipped with a ton of different special attacks that range from a diving kick and a Shoryuken uppercut to various attacks using his necroplasmic energy. And these include an energy punch, a fireball, a freeze attack, and a multi-fireball homing attack. And these are all very useful and powerful, but also drain your necroplasm counter at the top of the screen. And there's no way to refill it, so you have to be mindful of how much you're using these attacks. The other half of the game is the platforming, and this too ranges from pretty good to just kind of irritating. Spawn can perform a wall jump, and he can glide using his shroud. And there are numerous sections of the game where you'll need to put both of these abilities to good use. And there were even instances where I was reminded a bit of Demon's Crest, or maybe even ActRaiser 2, which certainly isn't a bad thing. And at various points in the game, you'll take on boss battles against the likes of Overkill, the Redeemer, and the Violator, and these range from super easy to actually kinda challenging. But at no point did I ever think the game was especially unfair, which is helped out by the fact that you have unlimited continues and there's a very simple password system. So while the gameplay isn't exactly an instant classic, it would have been nice, for example, to have a tutorial for all of the various special attacks, and some stages will definitely try your patience. But overall, I had fun with this one. The graphics and sound, though, I must say, are pretty impressive, but especially the visuals. If you've ever read a Spawn comic book, then you know that the artwork is always top shelf, oftentimes creating a very dark and moody atmosphere and being supremely detailed, as you'd expect from a Todd McFarlane creation, and the developers did their best to capture that feeling here. The stages are nicely detailed, the character models look really good and accurate to the comics, and the comic panel cutscenes are perhaps the best to appear on the console, even outshining the ones in Maximum Carnage in many instances. So the visuals get a huge thumbs up from me, and so does the sound design, featuring music that is for the most part really dark and atmospheric, almost ambient at times, which really matches well with the visuals and the tone of the source material. So while I wouldn't put Spawn in the S tier of SNES games, it's certainly got its flaws. I'd say it's at least a solid B. Nice graphics and sound, and gameplay that's pretty decent, once you work out some of the kinks. And this was a good start for Spawn in the world of video games. Where it would go from here though? Well, that's the stuff nightmares are made of.
You're about 2 seconds from wearing that smile around your ass.
In 1997, the world was seemingly punished with the release of Spawn the Eternal on the PlayStation. And holy hell, this is a great example of how to take some potentially cool ideas for a game and turn them into absolute dog shit. Spawn the Eternal blends together a third-person platforming game with a 3D fighting game, and fails miserably at both, which is a massive bummer because it's not too hard to conceive of a Spawn fighting game being at least pretty cool. There are a ton of awesome characters to utilize with some radical powers, and it could potentially be bloody as hell. Just imagine a Mortal Kombat style game with Spawn, Overkill, Redeemer, and a bunch of others, beating each other senseless and finishing each other off with some brutal fatalities. And you can fight in stages directly inspired by locations featured in the comics. Hell, Spawn himself even appeared in other fighting series, and the results in both instances were really cool, laying the smackdown in Soul Calibur and tearing people to pieces in Mortal Kombat, which is just pure badass. But here, this is just such a janky mess of a fighting system that it immediately sucks all of the fun out of the room. Basically, it goes like this. You run around a big, empty stage, smashing open crates and other containers looking for power-ups, such as an attack and defense boost, health replenishes, and some offensive magic attacks. And every so often, you come across a lone enemy just aimlessly wandering around, and that's when the game shifts into its fighting mode. So aside from these fights, you will not encounter any other enemies, nay any other characters, throughout the entire game. It's just completely empty, aside from the odd hazard here and there. Once you start fighting, you've got a couple of punches and kicks to make use of, and you can put together some very basic combos. But Spawn also has an array of special attacks, utilizing his chains, shroud, magic spells, and necroplasmic energy. But for the most part, you can just button mash your way through this one without too much pushback, especially since every enemy plays pretty much the exact same, regardless if they're a street thug, a medieval knight, or a caveman, so there's not much strategy required here. On the other hand, you can rip an enemy's arm off and attack him with it, so at least that's pretty cool. But really, after the first few fights, you'll likely be ready to put this one down and never pick it up again. and the shitty gameplay might at least be tolerable if there was a decent story complete with voice acting, maybe from the cast of the animated series, which also started airing in 1997. But instead, there is virtually no story at all, and absolutely zero dialogue from Spawn or any of the other characters. I mean, they had Keith David on the show, for fuck's sake, wielder of one of the most powerful voices in animation, and they couldn't get him in a recording booth for a few hours just to give us some line reads and a few grunts? Unbelievable. And aside from that, the graphics are, not good. It seems like the developers were leaning heavily into a dark and gritty vibe, which works for the source material, but it's a little too gritty if you ask me, and that every surface looks like an ugly mishmash of pixels, and you can hardly tell what anything is supposed to be. Some of the character models look pretty good, but overall this is just not a very pleasant game to look at. And Spawn himself looks pretty decent, and you do get to play as 3 different variations, but his run animation is just ridiculous. He looks like an old man running to the bathroom, not very becoming for the supposed general of Hell's armies. And on top of that, the sound design is also atrocious. There's virtually no dialogue, as I mentioned before, but the music included here ranges from barely noticeable to a bit irritating. When you're exploring a stage, there will be kind of ambient music playing that doesn't really add much, but isn't terrible at least. But then once a fight begins, it switches over to more energetic music, which has this very generic audio library sound to it. And it honestly just feels kinda out of place most of the time. So on the whole, the sound design gets another big thumbs down. Again, it's a shame because a decent Spawn fighter at least seems plausible. And so does a decent Spawn platformer. Spoilers for later in the video, but there actually was eventually a pretty good Spawn action platformer. But just sticking to the PS1, it's not hard to imagine a Spawn game playing kind of like Soul Reaver, for example. Exploring various locations, using your shroud to glide around and do some platforming, and unlocking a variety of hell powers that grant you access to new areas. That could have been pretty cool. But instead, we got the worst of both worlds. A shitty platformer crossed with a shitty fighting game. Spawn the Eternal just plain sucks. But at least we know things can only get better from here, right?
Wrong.
In 1999, we got the simply titled Spawn on the Game Boy Color, which was developed and published by Konami, which you'd think is a good sign. Konami was delivering a lot of quality titles around this time. But it's easy to forget that not everything with their logo on it was gold. And this has to be one of the worst games they produced in the 90s. For the most part, it's a fairly standard side-scrolling action platformer. And at the start of the game, you have 4 different stages to choose from. You have a standard punch attack and jumping kick, but by charging up the B button, you can perform a chain attack, which is super useful, as it homes in on the nearest enemy and deals good damage, but it also drains a bit of your health each time you use it, so you have to be frugal with it. On the other hand, there are a handful of firearms that you can pick up that replace your chains as long as you have a bit of ammo, and they also deal some solid damage. And in each stage, you'll encounter a mid-boss and an end-boss, and these range from insultingly easy to at least kind of tough. Though they're all pretty easy if you manage to hang on to some ammo. Which is funny to think that you can be facing down an angel with all of the powers of heaven behind him, but if you've got a machine gun, he's basically toast. Aside from the platforming stages, there is also a motorcycle stage where you do some road rash style street combat, culminating in a showdown with Billy Kincaid. And this stage is at least a nice little departure from the rest of the game, which itself is about as bog standard of a platformer as you can get. Just get from point A to point B, fight a boss, rinse and repeat. So in that regard, it's not exactly the worst game I've ever played, but it does get boring pretty quickly. Luckily, it's not a very long game, clocking in at just over an hour, and unless you're playing on the hardest difficulty, it's not a very difficult game either. As for the graphics and sound, I won't be too harsh because it's a Game Boy Color game. I wasn't expecting very much, but I'll say generally it looks fine. A perfectly serviceable 8-bit game, but as others have pointed out before, Spawn looks pretty lame here. For starters, he looks like he's wearing a corset, which again, not very becoming of Hell's favorite son. And his walk animation is, a bit dainty. I know we never really see Spawn walking in the animated series, for example, because he's always shrouded in darkness, but I imagine it doesn't look quite like this, or the old man run from the PS1 game. As you clear stages though, more bits and pieces are added to Spawn's attire, eventually including his shroud, which looks a lot better. It would have been cool if he just looked like this from the start of the game, maybe even incorporating his shroud into the platforming. But no, here it's purely for aesthetics, which is a bummer. But generally the graphics are fine for what they are. And so is the sound design. The music is pretty standard stuff, just some generic and forgettable chiptunes, but nothing too bad. But something of note about this game is that there are cutscenes featuring characters exchanging some dialogue. And these actually look pretty good, all things considered. But more impressive is that they are all fully voiced, which was just unheard of for GBC games. And fun fact, Super Mario himself, Mr. Charles Martinet, actually provides 2 voices here, those being the Curse and everybody's favorite demon, the Clown.
Hey, ugly, looking for something?
Who are you? What do you want?
Me? Just call me Clown. And I want nothing. But you might want to call an ambulance.
So that's at least pretty cool. And hey, 2 guys that played both Mario and Luigi have also portrayed the Clown, which is a totally useless fact. You're welcome. Anyway, aside from that cool little tidbit, this is a very basic, kind of clunky, and ultimately pretty boring platformer. And unless you're a massive Spawn fan or you just have to play every Game Boy Color game ever made, it's not really worth your time. There are much better platformers on the platform. Anyway, only a few months after this game's release, we would get yet another Spawn game courtesy of Capcom, and it was something completely different.
Spawn.
In January of 2000, Spawn in the Demon's Hand was released to arcades running on Sega's Naomi hardware. And like many Naomi games, it was eventually ported to the Sega Dreamcast later that year. And while it's certainly not what I expected from a Spawn game at the time, I must admit, this is a pretty kick-ass game. It's an arena combat style third-person shooter / fighting game, where you have a bunch of different characters from the Spawn universe to choose from. And then it's a simple matter of kill everything in sight. And each character comes equipped with an array of both melee and ranged weapons, such as machine guns, chainsaws, rocket launchers, and a whole lot more. Plus, even more weapons can be found scattered around each arena, along with power-ups for increasing your speed, offense, and defense, and refilling your health. If you're playing solo, then most of your time will probably be spent in the boss mode, where, as the name implies, each stage features a boss that you need to defeat to progress, and they're helped out by a bunch of cannon fodder bad guys. In this mode, each stage comes with a time limit, and whenever you die, 10 seconds is shaved off of your time, so you need to act fast and kill the boss as quickly as possible. And something especially cool is that most of the characters you encounter in this mode can be unlocked as playable characters, with a grand total of 36, though unlocking all of them takes a while and can get pretty tricky. Aside from the boss mode, there's also Battle Royal and Team Battle, but obviously these modes are best enjoyed with multiplayer, as this game supports up to 4 players simultaneously, and these modes follow the basic deathmatch rules. Whoever gets the most kills wins, and this can get hectic, intense, and very fun. Now, you can also play the boss mode co-op, in which case you can play through to the actual final boss, which is Malbolgia. But the Dreamcast version also offers you the opportunity to play with a CPU-controlled ally. So even if you don't have a second player handy, you can still enjoy everything the game has to offer. This is, after all, the only way you can unlock certain characters. So on the whole, while this game certainly isn't perfect, in particular I've always had issues with the camera and the auto lock-on being a bit wonky. But this is a very fun, pick-up-and-play arcade game that's perfect for quick gameplay sessions. And all things considered, it's a pretty good-looking and sounding game too, with some great character models and a variety of environments to play in, though some are a bit on the generic side. And the soundtrack consists mostly of hard-rocking, guitar-driven tracks that suit the intense and brutal gameplay very well. And of course, the intro sequence is really cool too. Again, an arena deathmatch game wasn't exactly my first thought for what an ideal Spawn game would play like, but Capcom did a solid job here. If you're a fan of this style of game, Spawn in the Demon's Hand is well worth playing. It's pretty damn cool. After this though, Spawn fans would have to wait a further 3 years before getting their hands on another game based on the hellacious superhero. And was it worth waiting for? I don't know, but my gut says maybe.
Is there a heaven? Is there a hell? There is one who knows the answers all too well. When you're caught between heaven and hell, make them both suffer. Spawn Armageddon, rated M for mature.
In November of 2003, we got what is to date the final Spawn game to ever see a release, and that is Spawn Armageddon, which was published by Namco and developed by Point of View, a developer that prior to this had mostly worked on console ports of various Midway games, like Ready to Rumble Boxing, Mortal Kombat Trilogy, Rampage World Tour, and the NFL Blitz games. But when they were finally handed something original to work on, they did a pretty damn good job, because Spawn Armageddon, while it has its flaws just like any other game does, is a solid and fun action title. And before I go on, yes, this is just one of many games that takes a lot of inspiration from the Devil May Cry series, even leading some people to write it off as just a clone of those games. And I have to take people's word on that because, believe it or not, and please don't hate me for this, I've actually never played a Devil May Cry game, which is shocking, I know, but I have played plenty of games labeled as DMC clones, like Ghost Rider, Castlevania Lament of Innocence, and now Spawn Armageddon. And clone or not, I still say this is a decent game. For starters, you're armed with Spawn's double-bladed axe called Agony, which slashes up enemies real good, but you also have the use of his chains for ranged attacks, and they are quite effective. But very quickly, you start to collect a variety of firearms, which start out simple enough, giving you a sawed-off shotgun and twin pistols. But eventually, you get way more firepower from the likes of twin Gatling guns and even a massive rocket launcher, which, needless to say, can really lay waste to bad guys. Because as we all know, Spawn really likes his guns. And if that wasn't enough, you also have a selection of necroplasmic abilities that can make short work of lesser enemies, and really put the hurt on more durable ones. So you are armed to the teeth in this game, and I greatly appreciated the variety of weapons. Your ammo is limited though, as is your necroplasmic energy, so you'll need to keep an eye out for extra ammo and energy refills, as well as the souls that are left behind by the enemies you kill, because it's only by collecting enough of these that you can upgrade your weapons and increase both your max health and your necroplasm. The combat is pretty easy to get the hang of, and it is fun, but there are definitely certain enemies and bosses that honestly annoyed the hell out of me. Especially these things called berserkers that can block your chains and regular bullets before quickly slashing at you. Get 3 or 4 of these things together and get ready to hurl some expletives. But overall, the combat is satisfying, and some of the boss fights against the likes of Violator, Cygor, and the Redeemer are indeed epic. Aside from the combat, you'll also be doing a bit of platforming, and this too works pretty good for the most part. You can double jump, glide through the air using your shroud, and latch onto certain grapple points using your chains. There are some areas where the platforming feels like a bit of an afterthought though, just something to pad out the stage. But overall, it's utilized pretty well. And then there are sections where you have to run back and forth hitting switches and whatnot, and these kind of drag a bit. And you'll definitely be ready when it's time to get back to kicking some ass. So overall, while I have my gripes, I really enjoyed playing through this one, which is helped greatly by the fairly decent graphics and sound design. The character models all look great, just how you'd want them to. And some of the environments at least are nicely detailed and look really good, though some are admittedly pretty bland, putting you in generic factory and sewer levels. But on the whole, definitely not a bad looking game. And that goes for the sound design as well. The music generally isn't anything memorable, but it's well suited for an action game like this. And the voice work is fantastic, featuring the likes of Frank Welker, John DiMaggio, and Kevin Michael Richardson absolutely kills it in the role of Spawn, being easily mistaken for Keith David. His performance as the titular hero is truly worthy of the mantle of Spawn.
Wanda, a love that haunts me. A love that no longer exists. A love that was taken from me by the Prince of Hell. You're my bitch.
So, DMC clone or not, there's a lot to like about this game. Solid action, good graphics and sound, and even some cool unlockables, in the form of comic covers and production art, which you can find scattered all around the game. If you're a fan of 6th-gen hack-and-slash action games, and especially if you like Spawn, this one is a must-play. And that leads me back to the title of this video. What are the best and worst Spawn games? Well, if you're playing alone, then Armageddon is definitely the way to go. But if you've got some other players handy, then In the Demon's Hand is a great bit of fun. And an honorable mention goes to the SNES game, for actually being pretty decent when it could have easily been a lot worse. As for the worst game, well, take your pick between the Game Boy Color game and Spawn the Eternal. Though I do cut the Game Boy game some slack because it's on an 8-bit handheld. There's only so much you can do with that. But Spawn the Eternal could and should have been a lot better. So that one takes the cake. The rotting, worm-infested cake. But what do you think? Let me know down in the comments. What's your favorite Spawn game? And if another is ever made, what kind of gameplay would you like to see in it? That's all for now though, and I think I just might shift my focus to another comic book crime fighter. But which one? Well, until next time, remember, not every clown is your friend. Some of them are actually demons from hell, just biding their time until they can rip you to pieces and take your soul.
Oh, come on, you scream like a girl. Do it like this. Ah!